I spend a lot of time interacting with video games. Whether it's the excessive number of games I've beaten in the last 5 years, the time I've spent creating and running a game store, or the embarrassingly long hours I've spent watching YouTube videos about games, it can seem like my whole life revolves around them sometimes. However, I was born in 1996, so I have hardly any hands-on experience with games from the 8-bit and 16-bit eras. That's what I hope to change with this video series. I'm coming at this with no nostalgia, and I intend to get to the bottom of the eternal question. Were games really better back in the day, or is it all the result of rose-tinted nostalgia goggles? I'm going to play all the games on the NES Classic in their release order and talk about the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like about them in a hopefully short video for each game. Now, on to the first one. Excitebike is a side-scrolling motocross racing game where your goal is to finish the required number of laps quicker than the allotted time. You use the left and right buttons on the controller to change the angle of the bike, and the up and down buttons shift which of the 4 lanes you are riding in. The A button is the accelerator and the B button is turbo, which is faster than the accelerator but adds significantly more to the temp meter. Once the temp meter is full, your bike overheats and you have to sit around for a second waiting for it to cool off. This mechanic results in you trying to balance the speed of your bike with not heating it up so much that it stops you dead in your tracks. I started with Selection A, which is the solo game mode. In this mode, there are no other bikers racing, so there's a lot less obstacles to have to deal with. I had no trouble making it through the first 3 levels easily enough, but the 4th level humbled me greatly, and I was 10 seconds off a qualifying time, so I got a game over. This wasn't really shocking to me, as I am aware that older games tend to be pretty hard, NES games especially. Some of that is due to the fact that games in arcades made more money if they could give players game over screens faster. And some of it is the fact that if someone spent around $50 at Funkoland on an NES game, or over $120 when adjusted for inflation, they expected to get some decent hours of gameplay out of it. Keeping the game difficult is a clever way of padding out content, especially when you had to put games on the minuscule data storage size of the NES cartridges. Excitebike itself is an astonishingly tiny 17 kilobytes, which I have a lot of trouble wrapping my brain around. 17 kilobytes is a smaller file size than any single frame from my last video. You could fit approximately 33,000 Excitebikes into the space my last video takes up on my computer. You can fit over 10 million copies of Excitebike into the newest Call of Duty. I think you get the point. Anyway, after failing spectacularly, I realized that new owners of Excitebike back in 1985 would have gotten the manual with the game. So I went to ask the all-knowing internet oracle and found a PDF that Nintendo had graciously uploaded to the internet at some point. There were some useful tidbits that I gleaned from the instructions, including the fact that if you fall off your bike, you can mash A to make your rider get back onto their bike more quickly. I also learned that the arrow mark on the track does not make you go faster, it simply reduces the temp meter, and you can therefore hit the turbo button more. The manual calls these little arrows the cool zone, which coincidentally happens to be the name of the room where I'm recording this. Fucking nailed it. The strange part of the manual, though, is learning that I didn't really finish the first 3 levels earlier. Excitebike actually starts with a challenge race, which is essentially a qualifying round. You can pick from challenge races 1 through 5, and if you get 3rd place or better, it puts you into the corresponding main race of the same number. This is a bit strange to me, as I would think it would have made more sense to just have 10 levels in a row, but it works out to be pretty useful because you can try again starting at the level you just failed on, provided you can beat the preliminary race before it. Now that I had armed myself with the most powerful weapon of all, information, I went back to play Excitebike, and I immediately failed spectacularly. I can't seem to get past the 3rd main race of this game. This is extra perplexing because at some point during the flat circle of time that was the 2020 lockdown, I completely beat Excitebike. Or at least I'm pretty sure I did. I for sure recorded that I finished it in my How Long to Beat account, but I have some doubts now that I can't seem to scrape by main race number 3. After giving the solo run a few more tries, I hopped into Section B, where competing motocross riders ride alongside you. They seem to have way faster bikes for some reason, but they're not really people you're racing against as much as they are an added obstacle that you have to take into account. Selection B is where Excitebike really shines. I still failed just as much on these runs as I did the solo runs, but the chaos of trying to navigate the tracks with bikers that change lanes constantly really brings out the best in the mechanics of this game. Several times I actually put the controller down laughing at just how many times my biker slowly rolled down the entirety of the largest hills, and I doomed that run to failure. There were tons of mistakes I made in Mode B, but honestly this was strangely charming to me. One thing that I was a little disappointed by is just how small the game is. I know I went on about how impressive it was to fit this game into 17 kilobytes of space, but if you spend about an hour or two playing Excitebike, you really get a full picture of what the game is like, and there's not really too much of a reason to keep going, at least while using a modern lens to understand this game. I understand that there were certainly kids in the 80s that played this game for hours and hours because it and Mario were all that they had, but nowadays, after a while, it just gets old. I am quite impressed, however, with the fact that they included a track editor. I'm not sure how the save function worked back in the day on actual NES consoles, but the idea of saving a track you made and coming back later to show a friend when they came over is amazing. Having spent too much time designing awful parks in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, I understand that this function would be easy to sink a good amount of time into. At the end of the day, even though I'm dog trash at Excitebike, it did a great job of charming me with a simple enough gameplay loop that was enjoyable for a while. Final verdict. Excitebike is good. I am not. 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and here's a quick word from our sponsor.